Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession." Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said. He replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs." "Yes, Lord," she said, "but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed from that very hour. It's a mysterious passage, isn't it? It shows Jesus in a harsh light, an uncaring light. Does it? Maybe not. Leaving that place, Jesus was in Galilee. He'd been followed by the crowds. He'd had people pressing in, desperate for his touch, wanting healing. Some were watching, wanting to condemn. And he wants to get away with his disciples. Where do you go if you are Jesus? Where do you go where you can get away from all those people, where you won't be followed? He does an extraordinary thing. He goes to Gentile country because no good Jew will follow him there because it would make them unclean. And Jesus goes to Tyre and Sidon. Now, we have thought about Tyre and Sidon for these last couple of weeks when we've been thinking about Elijah, because that's where Jezebel came from. It was pagan land. The worship of Baal and other gods. We probably know it now as South Lebanon. And the Jews would not follow him there. I wonder what the disciples thought. Lord, we're going to be unclean. But it obviously didn't bother Jesus. And it's not the first time he's been in Gentile country, because a few chapters before in Matthew he had landed in the region of the Gadarenes and healed the man amongst all the swine. But in this place, trying to withdraw with his disciples, he meets this Canaanite woman. And the Canaanites were considered to be irredeemably corrupt. Now there's a label for you. Irredeemably corrupt. The enemy of Israel, of the Jewish people. And she would have been well aware of those ancient rivalries between her people and the Jews, and their possession of the land that the Jews believed was theirs. Sounds like a modern story, doesn't it? And she came to Jesus crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me." And we've looked at that phrase actually over the last 2 or 3 weeks in other contexts, if you've been here in other services. Have mercy on me. Her language is interesting because she recognizes him as the Messiah by using the phrase, "Lord, Son of David." But her view is a bit skewed because it's the view of someone that sees the Messiah coming as a political and a military hero who's going to conquer Rome and set them all free. So she knew him for what he was, but she didn't understand who he was. Her theology was not quite straight. Not surprising, perhaps, because she was, after all, living outside of Palestine. And this woman, we don't even know her name. She cries out in desperation to Jesus. Crying out. This is not a polite hello or excuse me. This is an onomatopoeic word for raven shriek. If you know what an onomatopoeic word is. It means it sounds like it is. When I was trying to think of examples the other day, Stephen came up with some lovely bird ones like cuckoo and chiff-chaff and things like that. So it sounds like it is. And this is a word for a raven shriek. So it's not pretty. It's loud, it's urgent, and it's an inarticulate cry expressing deep emotion that she hadn't got words for. And that's the place of desperation, isn't it? The inarticulate cry of deep emotion. And so she's crying out in this way, and she's crying out for mercy. And here again is a surprise, because she may not have understood the kind of Messiah that Jesus was going to be, but she did know something of Yahweh, of Jehovah, because she asked for mercy as God defines it. She asked for mercy that reflected his covenant truth, that was mercy on God's terms. Such was her desperation. And we know she's desperate because it's her daughter who is suffering terribly. It's described as demon possession. We might know it today perhaps as mental health needs. We might know it today as special needs. We might know it as somebody who is in complete torment, in crisis. And what does Jesus do when he hears this desperate cry? Well, it says Jesus did not answer a word. Nothing. No response, no reply. We could describe it as unanswered prayer. And I bet we all know what that feels like. When we have cried out to God for something, and it's like he's gone silent. He doesn't hear. And what do? Well, I suppose we have two choices. We either quit and say, well, I never really believed it anyway, or we keep on praying. But this was a bit embarrassing, because even the disciples got to the point where they were very embarrassed, and they came to him and said, send her away. She's being a nuisance. She's making such a noise. Either heal her and send her away, or just get rid of her. Do something. And Jesus, the man that we know to be full of compassion, full of grace, what does he say? Having not answered her in the first place, he says, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. I wonder how the woman felt when she heard that, because she was not of Israel. She was the wrong side of the fence, if you like. But Jesus is being true to his calling, true to his commission from God. The woman does not give up, because her response to that is to come and kneel before him and say, Lord, help me. She humbles herself. And there is a sense in the meaning of those words that she kissed the ground in front of his feet. It's a desperate cry. And still Jesus doesn't seem particularly sympathetic. It's a wonder that this woman hasn't given up and gone away. he says, "It's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." There was a saying, Jews are the children, Gentiles are the dogs. So it sounds as though Jesus is being so unkind, doesn't it? Because the dogs in that sentence, Gentiles are the dogs, it meant the scavengers, the street dogs, the mean, the hungry. It was a derogatory comment, a horrible derogatory comment, and probably these days we would even consider it to be verging on the racist. But when Jesus said this, he used a different word for dog than the usual meaning of the street dog, the hungry, the scavenger. He used the word for a house dog, a pet, a beloved little animal. And he was saying the divine provision of God cannot be given to the house pet before the children have had their fill. The children of the household are the priority. That's why I've come. That's my commission. He's not saying the dogs won't be fed. It's a question of priority. And at this point, again, the woman could have taken complete offence and stomped off, because it was, even with the word that Jesus used, still not a terribly kind comment. But she sees a flaw in his argument. She sees a flaw in his logic, and she goes for it, because she says, but the household dogs don't have to wait until the children have finished. And if you know anything about children, and if you know anything about dogs, you know that children drop crumbs, and the dogs in the household know who is the greatest crumb dropper. And if you watch the dogs, where do they sit? In front of the crumb dropper, because that is where they are going to get the best pickings. And in other words, she was saying, so you can help me, a Gentile woman, because it won't detract from your mission to the Jews. And Jesus is thrilled, because he sees in her a faith, a spiritual understanding that he did not expect to find in a Gentile woman. And it opens up the way for him to be able to heal her without losing his integrity for his mission. And he says, woman, you have great faith. And this is not the meagre faith that any one of us can muster at any point in time. This is the faith that is given by God. It's the gift of faith. And so the daughter was healed. And when it says her daughter was healed, it means in the wholeness of that word, the fullness of healing, physically, spiritually, emotionally. And there is also a sense in the meaning of the word that the healing glorifies God. So the message for us? Well, I think there's something in there about persistence in praying. There's something about not giving up when Jesus doesn't reply. She didn't fully understand who he was, but in the end that didn't get in the way. Isn't that a relief? There's something in there about boundaries. She was on the wrong side of the fence, but there was a way. There was a way through. So maybe if you feel outside of God's love this morning, for some reason or another, there is a way. There's a way through. Because in the end, it was all about Jesus. And although it looked as though he had been terribly unkind to her, his compassion healed her daughter. Let's pray.